Welcome back to the Vandy 24/7 podcast. He's Brandon Bigsby. My name is Alaina Morris, and we're here after Vanderbilt's 82-54 loss to South Carolina. Brandon, it was really interesting because I don't feel the score totally reflected the way that Vanderbilt played, maybe more so in that second half, but first half, I mean, Vanderbilt took advantage of South Carolina's mistakes and they kept it pretty close. South Carolina had a 10-point lead heading into halftime.
Yeah, I mean, especially considering that with that first quarter, South Carolina was up 24-11, and you're like, okay, South Carolina's doing South Carolina things, but even early on in this game, Alaina, you felt like Vanderbilt wasn't that far off really from the Gamecocks. A lot of it was just Vanderbilt not being able to hit on a lot of open looks, and we saw them kind of cut into that lead a little bit. It was only 10 at halftime. Early in the third quarter, they cut it to as little as 6, and you're like, man, Shea Ralph and this team might actually have a chance to really keep in this game. And then Vanderbilt had, I think it was like a 6-minute drought of no-made field goals, and South Carolina really took advantage of that. And that's what the great teams do, right? South Carolina is just so good at taking away what the opposition is best at, which obviously for Vanderbilt, that's working through Michaela Blakes, working through Camille Pierre. We were able to slow them down probably as good as any team in the country have so far this season. And, you know, I don't think this is a game you can overreact to too much, but I do think that Vanderbilt, despite not playing their best game, did show some positive flashes throughout. I mean, again, they hit a few more shots early in this game. We're probably looking at this one a little bit differently. They lost by 28. I can go back and think of some mid-range shots that they had that just didn't fall. Michaela Blakes had some open threes that didn't go in. I think you could make a case that they probably could have lost this game by less than 20, but you know, South Carolina being South Carolina, stepping up when they needed to, elevating as the game started to get competitive, and Vanderbilt just didn't really have a consistent enough answer to keep with them.
Yeah, it just felt like their shots weren't falling. I think they ended up shooting, I want to make sure that's right, I think 31% for the game. Yeah. So just not a very efficient day. And of course, it's a day you can't have against the reigning national champion. And of course, they looked the part with that title. And so, you know, like you said, this isn't really a loss that you can be too upset about. It feels like just about any team in the country playing South Carolina is going to chalk that one as a loss, and that's just how it went today for Vanderbilt. And so I don't want to, you know, linger too much on the game because it kind of is what it is. They didn't shoot very well. Felt like South Carolina really took advantage of, you know, that drought they had in the third quarter. South Carolina with 47 second half points. So it just kind of feels like one where you know, have short-term memory. Obviously, you can address some of the mistakes, but you're not going to go play another South Carolina for a while or maybe even the rest of the year. They're just a different breed. But I think there's a lot of things to take away from today, and just want to touch on too that the fact that it was senior day, and so they honored 5 seniors: Jane Waba, Jordan Oliver, 2 without any more eligibility. So those 2 will be wrapping up their college careers, and then Leilani Kapanis, Ayanna Moore, and Sasha Washington all have 1 year left. And Sasha Washington did announce today that she'd be coming back to Vanderbilt for her senior year. So the crowd was very excited about that one as she was honored. And then, of course, no decisions yet, obviously, on Kapanis or Moore that make any sort of statement today. But I think that's obviously positive knowing that you get Sasha back after, you know, just a unforeseen year. Definitely not something that any of us could have predicted, and hopefully that she's back in good health. But that's obviously a good takeaway from today's senior day festivities.
Yeah, maybe not a win on the court, but definitely a win for this Vanderbilt program to get Sasha Washington back. Obviously, everyone knows what she's capable of doing on the floor. Has been such a stalemate for this team for the last 3 or 4 years, and obviously this year, you know, unforeseen circumstances took her out of the lineup. But one thing that I think we have to say about Sasha Washington, and we've heard Shea Ralph talk about it throughout the year, is that even though she hasn't been on the court, she has been really impactful for this team off the court as a leader. I mean, we see her all the time on the bench, coaching up her teammates. She is one of the more active and energetic ones on the sidelines all the time. She has been probably just as, if not even more important of a presence this year, despite not playing, than she has in her first 3 years here. So can't say it's too surprising to see her come back, but I think that the Vanderbilt faithful very thrilled to hear officially that she'll be back in a Vanderbilt uniform next year. And again, you just think about what Vanderbilt's been doing this year without one of their most important players, to know that you're going to have her back next year along with Michaela Blakes, along with a lot of the players returning that you assume would be here. Then it's got to feel really good for Shea Ralph and this team. So awesome moment for Sasha Washington to get that ovation. And then you mentioned some of the other seniors as well. Ayanna Moore, someone that's been at this program really since the start, has helped build this thing up. Obviously, no word on if she comes back next year or not. I think she does have an extra year if she decides to take it, so we'll see what happens there. And then Leilani Kapanis, who I think is been one of Vanderbilt's better players, probably their second or third best player over the last couple of weeks. She, I thought, was probably Vanderbilt's best player today outside of Michaela Blake's probably. So the seniors really did step up, it felt like, at certain points, and to see them come into this one, get honored, and you could tell how much it meant to Shea Ralph after the game as well in the press conference. So awesome to see them get a really, really well-deserved moment before the game.
Yeah, just some really special moments. You could tell how much, the families and of those players, they just had a warm embrace on the floor with Shea Ralph and Candace Story-Lee, and just a lot of appreciation between the two parties. But I think that, obviously, a couple of those players could come back. That's all up in the air, and Oliver and Waba without any more eligibility. But aside from that part of senior day, as you mentioned, Leilani Kapanis being important, and something that Shea Ralph talked about just now is how does she get the rest of her team going outside of Michaela Blakes and Camille Pierre? And I mean, Ayanna Moore just has had a really rough stretch recently. She's averaging 12 a game, and she hasn't hit that mark in quite a while. It feels like they need to get a consistent score. Madison Green has been that at times where she had a really rough day. Kind of feels like, that wasn't a favorable matchup for Madison Green, and so they've got to figure out, who can score for Vanderbilt. And I think that these next two games are going to be incredibly important. Texas A&M on Thursday, and then they head to Missouri, and I think A&M honestly might be the more favorable game. They're out without their best player, Aisha Coulibaly, for the year, and so it feels like Vanderbilt can take advantage on their home court. And although Missouri does not have a record that reflects it, they are playing everybody incredibly close. I mean, they have had leads at halftime over Oklahoma, Tennessee, and so that is a game that, on the road, you cannot sleepwalk into that one. That is a Missouri team who cannot be taken lightly, and these next two games are going to be incredibly important for seeding in the NCAA tournament, seeding in the SEC tournament, and it's time to figure out in the next two games, all right, let's clean it all up. We got to fine-tune everything. And so, again, South Carolina, it's tough to figure out what you did wrong because they're just an incredible team coached by Dawn Staley. But these next two games are very valuable for Shea Ralph, her staff, all the players. It's kind of make or break time. All right, let's figure these things out and get ready to head into March.
Yeah, and I mean, you heard Shea Ralph say it during the presser after the game that this is a time of year where you want to be playing your best basketball. Vanderbilt hasn't really been doing that to the last couple of weeks, at least to their standard. And, I think it is so interesting because you even heard her kind of mention a little bit about why this is so important to get things going down the stretch because of that seeding. When you're in the SEC, such a stacked conference, the difference between an 8 seed and a 10 seed, that's an extra game right there that you might have to play, and Vanderbilt's right in that thick between that 7 and 10 race where you've got Tennessee, you've got Florida, you've got a couple of teams right in that thick. And then as you mentioned, Alaina, NCAA tournament seeding, I mean, it's crazy how quickly things can change. This time a month ago, we were saying, man, Vanderbilt might be in contention to maybe host a couple of games. And now I think they come in today as a 7 seed and could potentially drop if things don't start to pick up. I think you feel rather well about where they sit as a 7 right now. I don't think that losing a game to South Carolina is going to drop them really. Everyone, I think, kind of would have expected Vanderbilt to likely drop this game today. But you have Texas A&M coming up, as you mentioned, one that should be a pretty winnable game for them. And then you have Missouri, who, again, Missouri maybe not popping out to you in terms of the record, but they've been playing really good basketball lately. Ever since they got that first win against Mississippi State a few weeks ago in conference play, they have really given some teams some trouble. I mean, they were competing really, really well with LSU just this time last week, so that's not a game that you can really sleep on. But you mentioned something else, Alaina, that I think is really true. And Vanderbilt, they're going to have to find some scoring, consistent scoring outside of Michaela Blake's. And we've heard 2 games in a row, Shea Ralph mentioned it after the game, that they have got to find that scoring outside of her. I mean, you look at the numbers today. Camille Pierre, she had 14, not too bad, obviously, but outside of her, the next leading scorer was Ayanna Mitchell with 9, which was a pretty quiet 9 points. I have to be honest, I didn't recognize it until I looked at it then, but I mean, you look at some of the others. Jane Nwaba was held scoreless. Madison Green, just 2 points. Justine Bassat, she only played 3 minutes, but didn't have any points when she was out there. And then the big one, I think, Ayanna Moore, 0 for 4 from the field, just 1 point in 21 minutes played. That feels like the big one that they're waiting for her to kind of get her game going. We've seen flashes of it. At Florida, she played really well. She's had a couple of games earlier on in January, I think, where you saw flashes of last year, Ayanna Moore, but just feels like it hasn't been there consistently enough. And if she can get her game going, that feels like that's what Vanderbilt needs, is that third scorer to consistently step up alongside with Michaela Blakes, alongside Camille Pierre, so they don't have to really rely on Blake's getting 30 plus and Pierre getting 20 plus for them to beat some of these top end teams.
And that's what Shay was kind of saying, is relying on Michaela that heavily is not realistic. You know, she might be incredible, but she can't do everything. And like you said, Ayanna Moore with only 1 point. She only had 3 against Oklahoma. She only had a couple the game before. I mean, she hasn't hit double digits in a while. And like you said, Vanderbilt's kind of like, all right, we need to see the Ayanna Moore that had 23 against LSU. We need to see the Ayanna Moore that had that really big game at Florida where she scored almost 20 points. I'm not sure the exact number, but I thought that was her best game of the season. It just feels like Vanderbilt needs to be like, all right, let's unlock the Ayanna Moore that we've seen before, because, I mean, it's now or never when they need her. And like you said, this game really shouldn't affect seeding. Can't imagine anybody saying that, oh, a South Carolina loss looks bad on your resume, because it does not. But these next two definitely could. It feels like Vanderbilt's pretty safely in the NCAA tournament, obviously, to have some great wins over Tennessee, Alabama, things like that. But I think the big thing is seeding in general of, okay, where are they going to be? Are they going to be a 6 seed? Are they going to lose a couple and drop to a 9 or 10? And so I think that's the biggest question, is what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks, and where will Vanderbilt end up in March?
Yeah, and I think that, again, you're going to be looking at Vanderbilt and their schedule. Obviously, it's favorable that you got a game like this out of the way now, and you have 2 games coming up that should be rather winnable. One at home against the A&M team that, as you mentioned, has been decimated by injuries this year. They were struggling pretty mightily against Mississippi State earlier. I don't remember what the final of that game was, but I mean, it was well over a 20-point deficit last time we had checked. And then you have a Missouri team that, is playing good basketball, but you figure if Vanderbilt can go into that game and play the way that they're capable of, should be a game they can come back with a win. So now you're kind of looking at other teams like Florida, like Tennessee, like Mississippi State, that are near them in the standings. And I think that's why the game Thursday left a little bit more of a sour taste in some people's mouths, because Vanderbilt was only 1 game back of Oklahoma in the SEC standings, and that kind of takes away a little bit of that ceiling that you potentially could have had. But there still is opportunity for Vanderbilt to move up in the SEC standings. There still is that chance for them to avoid that first night of play, to have to just go into that second game. And again, there is a massive difference between being a 7 seed and being a 10 seed, not just in terms of who you play, but also how early you play. And we saw last year in the SEC tournament, Vanderbilt just missed out on that first night. They went up against Florida, lost that game, and that put them in tournament danger. So it goes to show you how important that seeding can be. These next 2 games are going to be very, very critical for Vanderbilt, but fortunately for them, the schedule does seem to be in their favor if Vanderbilt does play the way that they're capable of playing, and I think the way that Vanderbilt should be able to play. They haven't played to that standard lately, but they have shown flashes of it. I think this team still knows that they are the team that we've seen them be against LSU earlier in the year, against Tennessee, against Alabama. That team didn't just magically disappear and go away. It's still there. They just have to find it and rediscover it. But now you're at the point, it's February 22nd, 23rd. It's got to happen really soon. There's not a lot of games left, and you're at the point now to where every game from this point could potentially impact where the rest of your season goes and whether Vanderbilt reaches that point that they want to be at come tournament time.
Yeah, Vanderbilt has not been able to string together some wins recently, and it kind of feels like, all right, now's the time to do so. This is an important stretch of basketball, and you have to think that they're kind of due for a run like that soon, but we'll see. March is coming up, and just want to say I really appreciate Brandon Bigsby for all of his coverage this season. This is his last game in Memorial for women's basketball this season, but man, couldn't have done everything I've done this season without this guy right here. He's been incredible to have at Vandy 24/7, so I really appreciate Brandon and everything that he's done for us this year.
Hey, you and Joey Dwyer both taught me very well. I would have been lost without both of you, so thank you guys for having me along the ride. And obviously the coverage not totally done yet. Still got the road games in the SEC tournament and the NCAA tournament, assuming Vanderbilt stays on this track coming up. But man, weird that this is the last one that I'll be at for the season, but I've had an absolute blast. Such a fun team and program to cover. Great teammates I've got as well, and you and Joey and everybody else at Vandy 24/7. So I'm gonna miss you on Thursday, but should be a fun game nevertheless, especially with being the last home game of the year.
Yeah, last game for him at home, so I had to give him his flowers because he truly deserves them. But for all of you guys, thank you so much for following our coverage along at Vandy 24/7. He's Brandon Bigsby. My name's Alaina Morris, and that'll be all for today.